Talking about sounds good, but they say I'm not angry or confrontational enough to actually get it done. Now, let me tell you something, Iowa. I don't need lectures on how to bring about change, because I haven't just talked about change on the campaign trail. I fought for change all of my life. I walked away from a job on Wall Street to bring job training to the jobless and after-school programs to kids on the streets of Chicago. Will make us president, or any of the candidates will make us president. Look at the choices they've made in the past, when it wasn't convenient, when it wasn't easy, and when the presidential spotlight was not on them. That's the kind of change that's more than just rhetoric, more than just a slogan. It's change that you can believe in. And by the way, change won't just come from more anger at Washington or turning up the heat on Republicans. There's no shortage of anger or bombast in Washington. There's no shortage of bitter partisanship out there. We don't need more heat. We need more light. And I've learned in my life that you can stand firm for your principles while still reaching out to those who don't agree with you on everything. And although the Republican operatives in Washington might not be interested in what we have to say, I think that there are Republicans in this audience and in Marshalltown and all across the country outside of Washington that are. That's the once-in-a-generation opportunity that we have in this election. For the first time in a long time, I believe we have the chance to build a new majority, not just of Democrats, not just of independents, but also of Republicans who've lost faith in government, who've lost faith in their Washington leaders, but desperately want to believe again in the possibilities of America coming together and solving big problems. That's why polls show that I do best against the Republicans running for president, because we are attracting more independents and Republicans than any other Democratic candidate. That's how we will win in November. That's how we will govern after we've won. That's how we're going to change this country over the next 4 or 8 years. You know, in the end, the argument we're having between the candidates in the last few days of this campaign is not just about the meaning of change. It's about the meaning of hope. Some of you know I talk about hope a lot. We've got hope on our signs. I gave a speech in 2004 called The Audacity of Hope. And so now some of my opponents appear scornful of the word. They think that it speaks of being naive or being passive or of engaging in wishful thinking. But you know, that's not what hope is. Hope is not blind optimism. Hope is not ignoring the enormity of the task before us or the roadblocks that may stand in our way. Yes, of course, the lobbyists will fight us every inch of the way on universal health care. Of course, our opponents in the general election will engage in their usual smears and attacks. Yes, the problems of poverty and climate change and failing schools are going to resist easy repair. Of course it will be hard. I know. I've been on the streets fighting the fight. I've been in the courts advocating on behalf of those who don't have a lot of power. I've watched legislation die because the powerful held sway, and those with good intentions didn't fortify those good intentions with enough political will. I've watched a nation get misled into a war because no one had the judgment or the courage to ask the tough questions before we sent our troops in to fight. The guiding force behind the most improbable changes this country has ever made. In the face of tyranny, it's what led that band of colonists to rise up against an empire. In the face of slavery, it's what inspired the resistance of the slave and the abolitionist. It's what allowed a president to chart a treacherous course to ensure that the nation would not continue half slave and half free. In the face of war and depression, it's what led the greatest of generations to free a continent and heal a nation. In the face of oppression, it's what led young men and women to sit at lunch counters, and brave fire hoses, and march through Selma and Montgomery for freedom's cause. That's the power of hope, to imagine and then work for what seemed impossible before. And that's the change we see. And that's the change you can stand for in 7 days. We've already, we have already beaten the odds that the cynics said could not be beaten. When we started 10 months ago, they said you can't run a different campaign. When I said that we would not take PAC money and we would not take money from federal lobbyists, they said you can't compete without taking money from Washington lobbyists. But you proved them wrong. When we raised more small donations for more Americans than any campaign in U.S. history. Had the chance to prove the cynics wrong once again. In 7 days, what was improbable has the chance to beat what Washington said was inevitable. And that's why in these last weeks, Washington is fighting back, as it always does, with everything that it has. With attack ads and insults, with distractions and dishonesty, with millions of dollars from outside groups and undisclosed donors to try and block our path. We've seen this script so many times before. But I know that this time it can be different. Because I know that when the American people believe in something, when they really believe in something, when millions of voices join together around that belief, things happen. If you believe, then we can tell the corporate lobbyists in Washington that their days of setting the agenda in Washington are over. They have not financed my campaign, they will not run my White House, and they will not drown out the voice of the American people when I am President of the United States of America. If you believe, then we can stop making promises to the American worker and start delivering jobs that pay, health care for everybody that's affordable, pensions you can count on, a tax cut for working Americans instead of companies that are shipping jobs overseas. If you can believe, we can restore balance to our economy and make sure that you have a president who is sitting in the White House thinking about how to make your lives better each and every day. That can happen if you believe. If you believe that we can offer a world-class education to every child and pay our teachers more money, not just talk about how great teachers are, but reward them for their greatness. And we can make a college dream a reality for every young person in America. Give them a tax credit so they can pay their tuition. In exchange for national service, we can do that if you believe. If you believe we can save this planet, then we can start finally breaking our addiction to foreign oil. If you believe we can end this war, and we can close Guantanamo and restore our standing and renew our diplomacy and once again respect the Constitution of the United States of America, because you will have a president who's taught the Constitution and reveres the Constitution and will obey the Constitution when he is president of the United States of America. That martial time, that is the future within our reach. That's the future within our reach. That's what hope is. That is what hope is. That thing inside us that insists, despite evidence to the contrary, that we can somehow make this a better world. Yeah. That something better is waiting for us around the corner. That there's a righteous wind at our backs. But only if we're willing to work for it. Only if we're willing to fight for it. Only if we're willing to reject the fear and the doubts and the cynicism, all those things that tell us that we have to just settle. We have to settle for what already is because what we imagine might be is not possible. That's what you're going to hear for these next 7 days. But if we glory in the task before us of remaking this country block by block, precinct by precinct, county by county, state by state, there's nothing we can't do. Now, there's a moment in the life of every generation when, if we are to make our mark on history, that spirit of hope, that belief in things not seen, has to break free. It has to come out. And this is our moment. This is our time. If you stand with me in 7 days, if you come out and caucus on January 3rd, if you will stand for change so that our children have the same chance that somebody gave us, if you're willing to stand up for that American dream that still eludes too many people, those people who still hunger for opportunity and still thirst for justice, if you're ready to stop settling for what the cynics tell you you have to accept and start reaching for what you know inside yourself is possible, then we will win this caucus, and we will win this election, and we will change the course of history, and the real journey to heal this nation and where the world will actually begin. Let's start on January 3rd. Let's stand up for real change. Thank you, Marshalltown.
You may be tempted to leave. You know, I don't know how you follow somebody like David Beasley. He was given an introduction, and I thought, let's pass the plates, man. This is like church. So will the ushers please come forward? If there ever was a good time to do it, it would be after Beasley gets finished lighting up the stage. What an exciting experience it is to be here with you. And I want to say thanks, not only for coming, thanks for being very patient, for giving me the opportunity to come. I know, quite frankly, when you're the last person on the program, you should do what Jesus would have said in the New Testament had he ever been the last guy on the program. He would have added this to the Beatitudes. Blessed are the brief, for they shall be invited again. Unfortunately, as most of you know, my life before politics was that of a pastor, and then I got into politics. So you know what that means. You're going to be here a while. And I may even ask you for money. I don't know. That didn't get much of a laugh. You guys. No, I'm not going to ask you for money. You will be here a while, I'm pretty sure. I'm not going to try to wear you out, but I want to say how much of an honor it is for me to come to see this kind of enthusiastic group of people who care about the country, care about its future. And I am overwhelmed with the opportunity to be on the same stage as my friend David Beasley, and before him, one of the great Americans that I've ever known, Cleveland Clary. I first heard Cleveland Clary, and I told him this story when I was a teenager, and he came to my church, as they did to make sure that the next generation was able to live better and freer than they ever could. Every one of us here tonight are here because somebody paid a huge price for us to be free. The generations that will come after us, they'll have to look back and decide whether or not we had the same kind of courage and commitment to make them free as our parents did to make us free. Our parents' generation are often called the greatest generation. And the reason we call them that is because these are the people that went through the Great Depression and a World War, and instead of becoming angry and bitter and cynical, giving up, they just became more determined that their kids would have a better life than they ever did. If there's anybody in this room who truly could say that he's the product of the American dream, I'd be the first to try to claim that I understand a little bit about that. Many of you would say the same thing, but my parents lived through the Depression. Sometimes growing up, I thought I had too, because they kept telling me about it. I swear there were days, I'm pretty sure they marched every day, uphill to school, both ways. I heard all the stories about carrying their lunch in a surf bucket, whatever that means. Now they walk through snow to get to school. We didn't even have snow in Arkansas. I don't know what kind of fantasy journey they had when they got older and looked back, but they told us about that anyway. And then they had gone through the experience of their country being at war. And they came out of that experience with an attitude that said, my kids will have it better than this. For my parents, there was a lot to overcome. My father never graduated high school. In fact, his eye looked all the way up the family tree as far as we could look. And my dad told me, son, don't look too far up that tree. There's stuff up there you just don't need to see. But what I can tell you is that there was no male upstream from me in my family lineage who had ever even graduated from high school, much less gone on to college. And on my mother's side of the family, I am one generation away from dirt floors and outdoor toilets. My mother grew up with just that. They wanted to escape that. They wanted my sister and me to escape that. And they were willing to do just about anything so that we could. So we didn't have a lot when I was a kid, but one thing we had discipline. We had a sense of firmness about what we were going to do. We were going to go to school, we were going to finish, we were going to behave, and we were going to make good grades. That wasn't an option, that was an absolute. I tell people I grew up in an extraordinarily patriotic household. Let me explain what my dad meant by patriotism. He laid on the stripes, I saw the stars. That's as old-fashioned a patriotism as anybody's ever experienced. It kept me straight. I know there were people who say, well, that wasn't very nice of him. Well, I look back, my parents would always discipline me with the thing of, this is going to hurt me worse than it's going to hurt you. I didn't believe that then. So I don't believe it now either. I still don't think it hurt me worse. But they did it because they loved me. They did it because they wanted for me to not ruin the chances that I had. And they knew that the chances I had were tied directly to the fact that I lived in the United States of America, where in this nation anything is possible. My dad was one of those guys who was a firefighter for the city of Hope, Arkansas. He worked as a mechanic on his days off from the fire department because there wasn't enough money as a fireman to be able to pay the bills and pay even the rent on the little rent house that we lived in on 2nd Street in Hope, Arkansas. True, when I was a kid growing up, the only soap we had in our house was lava soap. Most of you don't even know what that means, but those a little older, here's what it means. I was in college before I found out it's not supposed to hurt when you take a shower. Some of you, for your wives or other special people in your life, you got them a certificate to the spa so they could have an exfoliation. Hey, look, a bar of lava will give you the same thing. My dad only did one thing, and that was hard work. Back-breaking hard work. He wanted me to somehow find something different. So what did his son do? He became a politician, and believe me, it's mostly indoor work, and there is no heavy lifting in this job. We live in a world that is threatened every single day. And that American dream is threatened. On this very day, as we sit here in our freedom, halfway around the world, in a country I visited just less than 2 years ago, Pakistan. Former Prime Minister Bhutto. Tragedy meant everything is where they're going. For them to say that everybody had the same intrinsic value and worth was a revolutionary idea. So much so that it in fact started a revolution. And here's the way they said it. We hold these truths to be self-evident. All men are created equal and are endowed by their Creator with certain inalienable rights, among these life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. When you think about those words, they're pretty powerful because it reminds us that these rights do not originate from the mere documents of men, but actually do come from our Creator. And because He gave them, no government has the right to take them from us. The only thing a government ought to do is to preserve those rights that were given. And the rights and the power loaned from God, given to us as stewards and protectors so that we protect each other within the boundaries of those inalienable rights. And the first one listed is life. I'm a pro-life person, but I want to explain, for me, that doesn't just mean that I'm against abortion. I think sometimes people tend to limit it that way. It's much bigger than that. I'm for life. Because I believe that every one of you in this room has an equal intrinsic value and worth as anybody else. And it doesn't matter what your IQ is. It doesn't matter who your mother and father were. It doesn't matter what house you grew up in. It doesn't matter what street you came from. It doesn't matter what your last name is, whether it ever opened the door or closed one for you. Plenty of us in this room had some closed because of who we are, and some of us had some open because of who we are. But that basic concept is that none of that matters. Your basic worth, your value is equal to that of anybody else. If you have a disability, you're still of equal value. You haven't been lessened in your value. If you're elderly, you're not lessened in your basic value and worth. That's why when the 12-year-old boy was lost in the woods of North Carolina as a little Boy Scout, nobody said, hey, well, if he's not really done anything all that significant, we're not going to spend a whole lot of public money to go out looking for that kid. We said we'll spend whatever it takes to go find him because that could have been our 12-year-old. And nobody begrudged the fact that we went looking for him. When 3 hikers were lost in Mountain Middle, Oregon, I don't remember anybody saying it's a very expensive thing to launch those snowmobiles, helicopters, and airplanes to look for those guys, because we knew that could be one of our friends, one of our relatives. When 6 coal miners were lost in the coal mines of Huntington, Utah, the whole country held its collective breath to find out what happened to them. It wasn't because we personally knew them or we had acquaintance with them. It was because they were fellow human beings and we valued their life and their worth is equal to our own. And that's why we cared. That's what makes us unique as a nation. We don't write anybody else off as simply unimportant or expendable. The day that we think that any person is completely expendable because he or she lacks the worth that we have is the day that we've lost the heart and the soul of this great nation. And that's why there are certain principles that we have to stand for, fight for, and live for. Abraham Lincoln said over a century ago, if slavery is not wrong, then nothing is wrong. It would be fair to say that if we violate the sanctity of life and that's not wrong, then nothing is wrong anymore. It matters what we stand for. It matters what we believe. My wife and I have 3 grown children. Our oldest son is 31 years old. We have a 27-year-old and a 25-year-old daughter. And when they were little,